You talk about expectations and that, rules aren't always airtight at the state level. There's always some fudging here and there, but it's really that expectation that is terribly important. And, rules can help set those expectations and facilitate those hard choices. And I guess you've seen that happen.
Yeah, so at the state level, everybody knows that they have a balanced budget requirement, and almost every state has it embedded in statute or in their constitution. If you're a budget director, one of the things you know is that there are lots of escape valves that the general public may not be that aware of. You can issue debt, you can short your pension, you can pass things on to local governments. There are lots of unbalancing things you can do. But by and large, states do pass very fiscally constrained budgets. And they've done this for a long, long, long time, year in and year out. And that balanced budget requirement sets those expectations at the state level. So one of my formative experiences was balancing the budget during the Great Recession. And Georgia's revenues dropped from 20 billion to 15 billion. I mean, just a staggering shortfall. And the legislators, I was working in a nonpartisan role, but was heavily working with the Republican leadership. And they were absolutely terrified to be facing this kind of shortfall. They thought this was potentially the end of their political careers. And, it was really rough going into that moment. But boy, I mean, they sat down, they believed the budget had to be balanced, and they just steeled themselves to that process. They went out, they did presentations, all across the community to talk about, how they were facing this really rough set of choices, and they were trying to make cuts in a way that was fair. And, everybody was holding hands together to get through this process. And at the end of the day, those budgets passed by broad and bipartisan majorities. And it was really, really something to see. And, everything from the media to the town halls, just the expectations really throughout the state were that they had no choice. They had to sit down and get the budget balanced. And, and all of that comes to some degree from that balanced budget requirement. And the belief, even though we all know it's not really real, but the belief that you're going to have to make hard choices to keep the budget in line. And somehow we've got to find a way to translate that same sense of belief and expectations and, making sure the voters believe that elected officials have to sit down and make tough choices. Just one more thing, I can talk about it forever. There are many, many different aspects that flow from the balanced budget requirement that are just not present at the federal level. So for instance, when the revenue estimate is set at the beginning of the year, typically it's either an executive, the governor is setting the revenue estimate that is perceived as binding in states like Georgia. So the legislature sees that revenue estimate and they're like, okay, we have got a balance to that number. Other states have a consensus process where the legislature and executive get together, they agree on the revenue estimate, and that is binding. And so that nature of a binding revenue estimate, again, just not present at the federal level. Then there are the trade-offs that happen within a budget, right? So every time you propose an increase, if you're bound by that revenue estimate, you have to find a decrease somewhere else. And so it forces those trade-offs. And I would say the last really important thing, and there are probably a few more if I dig deep, but it happens on an annual basis. And so it's not like we're pushing this off to year 9 of a 10-year window. All of those trade-offs are happening within that fiscal year. And that's where the debate is centered. And so I think thinking about how to translate those things to the federal context will be very important for us trying to reestablish those norms of fiscal responsibility.